Welcome to the study guide answers for the eighth video in this Genesis Bible study series. These questions will be covering Genesis chapters 32 through 36. When faced with danger from Esau and his 400 men, how did Jacob react? Jacob reacted with apprehension and probably fear. And these would be common reactions when you think that the last time they had any kind of interactions would have been 20 years ago and they wouldn't have been positive. In fact, Esau wanted to kill Jacob when he had the first chance. And here, not only is Jacob have to worry about himself, but he has to worry about his family, that he could maybe have been thinking that he had drug into this situation without them knowing what might happen. What's your approach to managing fear in your life? Fear is natural when you're talking about something that's unknown. So I think first just recognizing that that's a normal reaction. Secondly, not letting the fear consume me to a point where I don't do something because I have fear. Unless, of course, it's something you shouldn't do. And I think sometimes people don't understand that sometimes fear actually is good because it can stop you from doing something that is dangerous or something you shouldn't do. But in normal things that you just get some fear of, it's good to realize that you should have trust in God, maybe pray, but then ultimately go through with it and overcome that fear. It's obvious that Jacob is having trouble trusting that God will follow through with his promises. Are you ever skeptical when someone promises to do something for you? Really depends on the person and the situation. If it's someone I know well and I trust, then if they say they're going to do something, I know they will. If it's someone I don't know very well, yes, there will be some skepticism. People tend to say they'll do things and not always going through with it. And I don't think it's because they don't want to go through it and are just saying they will. I think sometimes people promise more than they can do and that they actually do want to be helpful or whatever, but just for whatever reason can't. So I would say that yes, I trust people I know and that they will keep their end of the bargain in terms of promises. But people I don't know as well, yes, I'm skeptical of if they will keep their promises, although I will give them a chance to do it. If your faith has ever wavered, reflect on that time. I think it's all right to not be presumptuous. So even if you feel like you're doing what God wants you to, you probably will always have a little bit of doubt. So I would say my faith has wavered more in myself and if I am actually doing what God wants me to, or to not get too big of a head of, yeah, this is what God wants for sure, because you never quite know for sure. So I'd say my faith has wavered in that respect, but has my faith in God Himself, in that eventually His providential plan for me will be realized, I'd say no, that I haven't wavered in that respect. Why is it okay to doubt other people but not God? Well, with people, they can obviously do bad things. You could even say breaking a promise or not doing something would be bad, whereas God can only do good. So you can't really doubt God because ultimately, whatever He has planned for you, even if you don't see it, will come true. So you can't really doubt Him. You can doubt your opinion on what God wants from you, but you can't really doubt God. Jacob and an angel engage in a wrestling match, which Jacob wins. What does this victory signify? It just signifies that, yes, you can struggle with things, but with God's help, you can overcome and persevere. It's obvious that God had to have helped Jacob in this situation because he would not have been strong enough to win in a wrestling match against an angel on his own, even though we know he was fairly strong himself. In today's society where God's presence is not always felt, keeping a strong faith and a consistent prayer life can be a challenge. What enables you to persist in the struggle and fight like Jacob did? I think that's an easy thing to miss in the whole wrestling with the angel thing. And it's like we wrestle with God ourselves. And I don't mean that in like a derogatory mean. I just mean that it's not always obvious what's meant to happen. And in a society that we have today where everything is immediate, like I can literally go and get any kind of food I want in less than 5 minutes, having that strong faith and a consistent prayer life when maybe your life isn't going well at the moment, that can be a struggle, but you have to persevere through it. And one thing to keep in mind is that God puts obstacles in our way, or obstacles get in our way, and it really just depends on what kind of way we want to handle it. Do you want to look at it as a negative thing or think of it as a positive? And if through life you take all your struggles or things that are going bad and you put a positive spin on it, that can be helpful. And one thing people do tend to do is if they're struggling with something, they'll pray even more. So in some ways, when you've got these struggles and things like that, it's good to pray more. That'll draw you even closer to God. And maybe that's why that struggle's there, so that you will grow closer to God. We all wrestle with God about certain things, like why is there evil and suffering in the world? In which areas do you wrestle the most with Him? For me, yes, evil and suffering is bad, and I I just understand that it'll be virtually impossible for God to explain to us as mere humans why there's evil and suffering. We don't see the big picture, but I do keep in mind that God can and does use every evil and suffering eventually for good. So even if we can't see what that good is, it's with it's not within our scope of reason that that will end up happening. The area I probably wrestle the most with God is just in I kind of wish God would just exactly let me know what he wants from me. And maybe if it was written out for me, it would give me a little comfort, right? But then again, I also think sometimes that even if God told you exactly everything that he wanted from you, that you might still disagree and not do it. So maybe it's best that in a lot of ways we have to come to these realizations through contemplation and having a good conscience of what God wants from us on our own. And by doing that, by owning it ourselves, it means we'll be more likely to do it. Think about parents who write out a list of everything their kids have to do. They're a little bit less likely to want to do them versus if the kids come up with a list on their own of things they want to do, then they'll be more likely to do them. So maybe God works in that way himself by not making it really obvious for us what he wants from us. Can we change God's mind? No. God is immutable, which means he's unchangeable. That includes his intellect. So we can't change his mind. He is also outside of space and time. He already knows everything that's going to happen. Anytime you see this in the Bible where it's like God seems to have changed his mind or gets emotional about something, those are just the author's way of trying to make it easier for us to understand God. But it's not really God changing his mind like in Sodom and Gomorrah. He doesn't change his mind. That's just the writer using that so that we can more easily understand the story. Once again, we see a change of name, this time from Jacob to Israel. What is the meaning of the name Israel? Israel means to struggle with God. What makes this name change important? It really makes it important in that since all the Israelites, and that's what they end up being called, in a way come from the seed of Jacob, in that the 12 tribes are his children, and in some cases grandchildren. It's important because the name Jacob meant deceiver, and you wouldn't want all the Israelite people to be called deceivers, right? But you could also make the argument, well, what about struggling with God? That seems a bit odd. But it actually doesn't when you think of the fact that the Israelite people throughout biblical history do end up struggling with God. There's the golden calf incident. There's the getting punished and having to stay 40 years in the wilderness. And there's many other examples of where the Israelites struggle against what God wants for them. How does Jacob see God face to face? Well, just like anyone who saw God, it would have been some physical manifestation of God. Why did Jacob arrange his children and wives in a particular way when he saw Esau coming? Mainly because that's just what they did in the culture of that time. They would arrange them from the quote unquote least important to the most important. And that was just so that as this person came up to greet them, as they greeted more and more people, they would have been of greater importance. And that's just something we see in these times. Even when things are listed, they always put the most important person first a lot of times in text. And that's just because in these times they put a lot of importance on the differences of people and groups. When Esau was last seen, he had expressed his intention to harm his brother. Now he seems genuinely happy to see him. What does Esau's response to Jacob suggest about forgiveness? It really just shows that even in the most extreme cases, people can be forgiven. The birthright incident would have been a very traumatic situation for Esau, and it just shows that probably by forgiving his brother, he was able to move on with his life and end up getting all the wealth that he did obtain. And so I think it's an important thing to remember. If you hold on to something, a lot of times it just drags you down more than the person that you maybe should be forgiving. Could you speculate on the reason behind Esau's change of heart? Well, I mean, he still would have loved his brother, even though what had been done. And sometimes just time itself heals wounds. So maybe as the years went on and Esau matured more, he just came to the realization that he actually had a bigger role to play in why things went down the way they did. And that's good for him. A lot of times people don't realize the role they play in these potentially bad things that happen to them. And maybe if we would think of that more, we could forgive better. I mean, Jesus talks about that when he says people are worried about the splinter in their neighbor's eye instead of the log that is in their eye. And I think we do that all the time. Even today, we tend to blame others more than look at ourselves and see where maybe we could have done things differently so things didn't play out in the way they did. Have you forgiven everyone who has wronged you? Why or why not? Yes, I have, but I really haven't ever had a situation where somebody did something so horrible that it was hard to forgive them. Now, there's been people who've done things and it's taken time to forgive them, but I've understood maybe more later in life, but at least I understand it now that really when you hold on to that anger and pain, it just brings you down that a lot of times this person, whatever they did to you, they've already forgotten it. And, they're probably not worrying about it and thinking about it near as much as you are. So ultimately, even if they did something horrible to you, you're the one still suffering, and they probably aren't. So when you can forgive someone, it makes it so now your suffering can go away as well. What are the benefits of forgiving someone even if they have caused significant harm? Like I said on the last slide, it just has more to do with you end up getting healing when you can forgive. If you're the one holding on to this grudge or whatever you want to call it, then you have anger and pain for it, and that's going to affect you tremendously. Whereas once you forgive someone, and we've all forgiven people for certain things, so you can realize this on your own. It's just better for you. It turns your life and makes your life better. Now I will say this: the closer someone is to you, and the more harm they do to you in that way, I think it can be harder to forgive them, but you still should. And one other thing to keep in mind too with forgiving is if this other person does still hold on to it as well, if you can genuinely forgive them, then that can help them heal. Now, also, though, you can forgive someone, but that doesn't mean you forget what was done. So if somebody slaps me in the face and I just forgive them, that's good. But if I go back and I get slapped again, it's like, okay, I forgive you again. Yeah, that's good. But how many times am I going to go back and keep getting slapped? So the point is, if you know somebody's going to keep slapping you, well, just don't go in that situation again where it can happen again. That way you don't even have to worry about forgiving them because you're just not in that situation. So, yes, forgive everyone. Forget, no, usually not. Esau's joy upon seeing his brother appears genuine. What could cause Jacob's apparent distrust towards him? Maybe he just couldn't believe that his brother had so fully forgiven him. And maybe Jacob, looking within himself, would think, well, I wouldn't have forgiven my brother if the shoe was on the other foot. And ultimately, too, it ends up becoming a trust issue, and there probably were, throughout their history, trust issues. So maybe Jacob's thinking, well, what kind of game is he pulling, and how is it going to actually end up turning out? And you got to remember, Jacob, his name means deceit or deceitful one. So he obviously was a trickster, as we said before. So maybe he was worried that his brother was doing the same thing to him. Can trust be repaired after it's been broken? Yes, it can be repaired, but trust is a hard thing to gain back, and I think it would take a lot of work. And the closer you are to someone, the more difficult it is to overcome that and trust them again. So I think the key thing here is just hopefully you don't lose the trust of someone, because once you've lost it, it's hard to gain back. I think getting it initially even can take some time. I don't think you should just trust anyone in everything they say the first moment you meet them, but over time you can build up a good trust. But if it gets broken, it can be virtually impossible to completely heal, but you can repair it. What causes us to doubt individuals who seem excessively kind? We doubt people who seem excessively kind in a situation when we don't know them. So when we know someone well, if they're excessively kind, we just understand that that's just how they are. They're a really kind, nice person. But with a stranger, unfortunately, a lot of times you end up thinking, well, what do they want from me? Because a lot of times they're being that way because that's what they want, something from you. And so I think we just have some doubt because if they're a stranger, we just don't trust them yet well enough to accept it at face value, which it might be, but we just don't have enough knowledge of them yet to know which it is. Is it an act or is it genuine? Is there a connection between our response to an overly kind individual and our fallen human nature? Yes, there definitely is. Ever since sin came into the world, that just means that some people are bad. Not everyone will be kind. And some people use that illusion of kindness to mask the bad that they actually want to do. So I think that's just natural for us to doubt, especially strangers, like I said, who are overly kind to us. Rape is a serious crime. What does the term rape mean? Well, if you look on some government websites, they talk about the physical elements of rape, like the the sticking of things in orifices without permission. So they really focus a lot on that element of it. But I think there's another element, which is the emotional element of a lot of times rape is someone trying to get power over you and to dominate you. And in a lot of ways, that element of it is much more harmful than the physical element of it. What is stolen during a rape? I would say dignity. That dignity is stolen. When you do something like that to an individual, you're basically showing no respect for them. And we have to remember that all humans are a temple, and we should treat everyone as such. So dignity is what is stolen during a rape. Can the act of Dinah's brothers killing every man in Shechem be considered justifiable? No, you can't do one evil act to justify another evil act. And there were a lot of innocent men there that were killed because of the actions of one, or at worst, maybe a couple individuals. Would it have been justifiable to kill the perpetrator who raped Dinah? This answer is a little bit more tricky. Because in today's society, I would say no, because we can lock a person up in jail and we can punish them and keep them from raping others. Back in those times, and there weren't really jails and things like that, it was maybe a little bit more justifiable to kill the one person if you felt he would go out to rape others. Now, it was a little bit more, I wouldn't say moral, but it was a little bit more accepted back then to do these kind of acts, because a lot of times you would just end up marrying that person if you raped them. So I don't know if Shechem would have been considered a serial rapist or not, but I would say that there wasn't justification to kill him regardless of the situation, but I could see how and why it was done. In some countries, rape is legal. Are such actions acceptable in those countries? Whereas they might be acceptable from a legal standpoint, they're definitely not acceptable from a moral standpoint. And living a Christian Catholic worldview, it is obviously unacceptable from just the dignity standpoint of things. You are taking away the dignity of someone when you rape them. So even if it is legal, that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean it should be done. Laws like that are human laws, and yes, we have to follow human laws, but if it's something as egregious as that, that doesn't mean it's right. These kind of laws can and do get changed as time goes on, but it is never acceptable and it will never change that one shouldn't rape someone, because that takes away their dignity. I don't care how many years more there are society lives, that will never be a good thing to do, even if every country said it was. Jacob fears that Dinah's brother's impulsive anger will lead to more issues. What does this say about acting out in anger? I don't think it's ever good to make any decisions when you're angry. It clouds your judgment, and when you act rashly like that, you end up doing things you regret later. And sometimes you won't think of the repercussions of your kind of reactionary anger that you're having in a situation like that, and then now you're left to clean up the mess later on. And I think that's what Jacob was a little upset about. Is it possible to make good decisions while feeling angry? In the act of feeling angry, no, I don't think you can make a good decision in that situation. And even think about yourself. Have you ever made a good decision while you're feeling angry? I don't know anyone who could say yes to that. Now, anger can spur you on when you're not angry anymore to change something, and that can be a good thing. But while you're actually angry, I don't think you can make a good decision at that moment. Some argue that decisions made with emotions, be it positive or negative, are unwise. What reasons are there to believe this statement? Mainly because I think when you're in a high emotional state, you're just not able to completely think things through rationally. So whether you're overly happy or overly upset, I just don't think you can make a good decision then. So it's always important to be calm when making any sort of decision. You've heard of people who they meet someone and then 2 days later they go and get married because they're on that kind of emotional high of meeting someone. And a lot of times, if not almost all the times, those kind of relationships always end bad. Give an argument against the last statement. I always say that you should be able to argue both sides of the coin. So how would I argue against the last statement? I would have to argue on it more just that your feelings can spur you on to make changes. And so if something feels good to you and you are somewhat apprehensive of it and it's giving you pleasure, then yeah, you might want to do that more, or add that to your things that you do, or something's going bad and every time you do it, it's bad, that you might change and not do that anymore. But I still would have to say that that only is reactionary after the fact, and you would still need to get a little bit of space and time in between before you made a decision one way or the other. What is the purpose of God repeating the covenant promises to the succeeding generation of patriarchs? We like to have things repeated as reassurance. It's like if my wife tells me I love you, I don't sit there and say, well, I know you do. You already told me that, yesterday. Why do you keep telling me it? We actually like to hear positive things repeated. So God's just doing that whenever he repeats these promises. It's just reassuring these people that, look, I am with you and this is what you're going to get. Why do you think we like to hear promises repeated? Mainly for that reassurance. And then there's also just that it can be comforting to hear certain things over and over again. Just like if you look at something, pictures and things like that, you get comfort from that. So even hearing promises repeated can also just give you pleasure, and bring you happiness. So it's the same thing, those kind of reasons. So we like to hear promises repeated because it brings us happiness and joy. What was Reuben's goal in line with Bilhah, his father's concubine? Mainly to make his mother, Leah, the top wife. When Bilhah slept with Reuben, that would mean Jacob wouldn't have relations with her anymore, so she would have been out of contention for the top wife. That would have only left Zilpah, who was the slave of Leah, and Leah would have been of higher standing than her slave. So most likely by doing this, he assured that his mother Leah would be Jacob's top wife. What was the ironic consequence of Reuben's action? We won't really see the ironic situation till a little bit later, but by trying to make his mother the top wife, he took himself out of running to be the top son. He will lose his firstborn status, and we'll see that later in Genesis. What did Jacob do with Reuben's birthright? As I said on the last slide, he ends up taking it away from Reuben. So there is a major consequence here for Reuben. Can you explain why Jacob and Esau separated? Mainly just because of a lack of resources. So they both had such grand amount of wealth with cattle and things of that nature that the resources couldn't hold both of them. So they were forced to separate, very similarly to how Lot and Abraham had to separate. If they hadn't separated, what could have been a potential outcome? Strife. They could have gotten upset with each other because they were impinging on each other's resources. So it just made the most sense for them to separate if they wanted to keep some kind of peace between them. People who have material possessions often feel envious of those who have more. Does gaining more materialistic wealth lead to more happiness? No. If you have enough and you get more, it's not going to necessarily make you more happy. It might make you a little bit more happy for a while, but no, our happiness is not completely based off materialistic wealth. I can make an argument that, if you don't have a roof over your head, you'll be pretty miserable, and getting a roof over your head will make you permanently more happy, and I don't think there's any denying that. But once you have your basic needs taken care of, do you really need more? And if you want to look at something like food, right? If you're really hungry, you want food and you eat it, but there comes a point where you really can't get any more happy, and if you keep eating food, you'll start getting less happy. Or you can take something like an island. If you buy an island, it's like, yeah, you'll be pretty happy about that. But if you buy 50 islands, when you buy the 51st, I don't think you're going to get that same level of happiness. It's not going to do you any good. So happiness and materialistic things, yes, you can get some happiness from it, but you're not going to get that ultimate happiness, and the more you have, the less happy you'll get when you get more. How is the separation of Jacob and Esau like the separation of Abraham and Lot? Mainly in that the wording's very, very similar, and that Abraham and Lot were called brothers. Even though they weren't, they're still called brothers, and Jacob and Esau are brothers and are separating for the exact same reason, which is resource reasons. And that's it for the study guide answers for this 8th video in the series. Next time we'll be covering Genesis chapters 37 through 41, and I look forward to making the video and having everyone watch it. Thank you. Bye.